Chapter 300. In the headquarters of South Shore. General Dalin's face was livid. He had spent the entire autumn and winter to replenish the Third Fleet, which had suffered heavy losses in the last battle. Because of this, the Fourth Fleet, which should have been completed long ago, only had 80% of the ships of the official fleet. But now the entire Third Fleet had been destroyed in a single day. Out of over 100 warships of various sizes, only 8 had managed to escape back to South Shore. Most of the others had sunk, and about a dozen small and medium-sized warships had been captured. The only good news was that the Third Fleet had also dealt a heavy blow to the enemy. According to the report, the Bloodsail fleet had sunk about 50 ships. This result was not enough to comfort the people. It was very simple. The damned Bloodsail pirates had betrayed the humans and joined the orcs, which had tipped the scales of victory. Humans were no longer the overlords of the sea. Goddamn Fairville. Dalin smashed a solid wooden table into pieces with a punch. Duque, Andoin, and Lang were all silent. Duque felt a little guilty. Back then it was a certain someone who provoked the Bloodsail pirates. Duke killed him and captured him, which was how the Stormwind Kingdom's fleet came to be. Duque cursed in his heart. I should have gotten rid of them. Duque was just wishful thinking. The world of Azeroth was too big. If he wanted to deal with the Bloodsail pirates, Duque, who did not know the coordinates, had no place to teleport. Teleport to Stormwind City, which was occupied by the orcs. That would be too much. Even if he rode a griffin, Duque had to spend more than a week crossing the entire continent to Stranglethorn Vale, which was the southernmost part of the continent. Then he had to rely on his unreliable memory in the game to find the Bloodsail pirates' nest. Then, without any help, he had to subdue the remaining 3 fleets of the Bloodsail pirates and make them abandon their nest and head north? Just thinking about it made Duque's head hurt. But now the Bloodsail pirates had come themselves. If it was just them, Duque would not even have a breather. The problem was that they were mixed up with the tribe. That would be troublesome. Noxus asked, how many fleets do the Bloodsail pirates have? 3, but their combined strength is roughly equal to 2 of Kul Tira's fleets, Duque muttered. No, I know Fairville. That guy never puts all the stakes on anything. Therefore he would only bring 2 fleets at most. The problem is the tribe's new battleship. Dai Lin recovered from his anger. Turayan murmured, even if our navy can still suppress the Horde's fleet, but Lothar's face was pale. But we won't be able to stop the transport ships. That was the main point. The Horde did not need to have complete control over the sea. All they needed to do was cross the damn sea and they would be able to display their unparalleled land superiority. Lang asked, will the tribe attack South Shore again? This was not nervousness. On the contrary, it was a kind of hope. Now that Duque was running South Shore like an iron bucket, he couldn't wait for the tribe to be so stupid as to kill themselves. Duque shook his head. I dare say, unless the tribe replaces the dead Black Hand as their chief. If it was Orgrim, he wouldn't do something so brainless. But we can still think of a way to force the Horde to attack South Shore again. Duque changed the topic. Really? The Alliance's leaders were overjoyed. I have to remind everyone that this is not a good thing, Duque said in a low voice. Why? Lang asked. I plan to hang Blackhand's head and the flag of the previous chief at the port of South Shore. This will make the Horde attack South Shore again, but it will also make the last group of orcs who openly oppose the new chief, Orgrim, die. After a moment of silence, Noxus said, let's do that. I've thought about it. This will increase the Horde's combat power in a short period of time, but it will also weaken the Horde's fighting potential. Everyone came to a realization. The orcs who were unhappy with Orgrim might change their minds in the future, but if they died now, there would be no future for them. In the past winter, the orcs must have gone out with their wives and children. Before the new generation of orcs grew up, there would be 1 less orc dead. Then it's decided. We will force the Horde to attack South Shore. At the same time, we will see if we can fight the Horde at sea and regain control of the sea. That afternoon, Black Hand's huge frozen head was placed on the lighthouse at South Shore's port. At the same time, a battle flag of the previous chief was placed there. Kurtiraz's fleet deliberately sent out the Horde's scouting boats to watch, and even ignored the scouting boats that came to check. Yes, I want you orcs to know. Duke's ruthless move caused a lot of trouble for Orgrim on the orc side. This is blasphemy. Blasphemy against the warriors of the Horde. Blasphemy against the glory of the Horde. Attack South Shore and kill all the humans. Turn their chief's head into a pot of urine. A great number of chieftains of small and medium clans were clamoring in Orgrim. Their clamoring annoyed Orgrim to no end. This was the result of Orgrim's lack of prestige. Do you want the warriors of the Horde to break through the strongest defense line of the humans? Let the warriors of the Horde die for nothing? Orgrim cursed. The orcs are invincible. The weak defense line of the humans can't stop our battle axes. This was already a spiritual victory. Great Chief. As long as we can stop the human warships, the warriors of the Horde are invincible. This guy wasn't that stupid after all. Great Chief, would you rather trust those dead humans and traitors who betrayed your own people than trust the warriors of your tribe? A chief brought up the Death Knights and the traitors of the Bloodsail pirates, causing Orgrim's eyelids to twitch. In that instant, Orgrim had the urge to smash that guy's head with his hammer. Of course, the defeat at South Shore was partly a test, but wasn't it because the former Great Chief, Black Hand, was too prodigal? If he had enough elite soldiers, Orgrim wouldn't have accepted the Death Knights. Orgrim was extremely annoyed. Alright. All chiefs who are willing to attack South Shore, please step forward. The orcs' new fleet will open the way for you. In an instant, dozens of chiefs from small and medium clans stepped forward. Their numbers were so many that Orgrim almost went crazy. At this moment, the chief of the Dragonmaw clan, Zulu Hid, gave Orgrim a look. When Orgrim turned to look at Grom Hellhowl, Master Howl gave him a nod of approval. Alright. As you wish. Here's our plan this time. Chapter 301. The 26th of March, Year 2 of the Dark Portal. A large-scale sea-crossing battle that did not exist in history had begun. It was different from the previous probing attack. This time the Horde had turned out in full force. The Alliance's scouts had risked their lives to report that the orcs had filled all the beaches in the wetlands where ships could be boarded. It was estimated that the Horde would send 500,000 troops this time. The orcs would either send this batch of troops to the northern continent or feed them to the fishes in the sea. They knew that more than a third of the 500,000 orcs were laborers, and there were many new recruits who had arrived through the Dark Portal. Compared to the previous 500,000 orcs, their combat power had decreased by at least 30%. That number was still quite frightening. Have those beastmen gone mad? Every noble and neutral Dalaran mages who had heard of this news were shocked. It was only then that Rotterdam, Dalajan, and Alterac quickly passed a resolution for an all-out war, and the entire kingdom began to mobilize. I hope we can make it through this time, Noxus muttered. On the flagship of the First Fleet of Kuel Salis, Admiral Daelin was staring at the sea map. Looking at the 3 blood-red model ships that represented the 3 fleets, Daelin was distraught. Apart from the time when the Third Fleet got too close, Daelin had never taken the Orc Navy seriously. This time, the enemy was not the silly Orc transport ships that were almost like targets. Not only was there an Orc battleship of unknown strength, but there was also his old rival, the former Duke of Kul Tira's Fairville. Fairville had once challenged him for the throne, so Daelin did not dare to underestimate him. Even though the quality of the new batch of Bloodsail battleships was not as good as the original Kul Tira's battleships, the quantity was there. After Fairville's training, the standard of the pirates would not be too bad. Even if it was not the highest level of threat, Kul Tira's battleship would at least have to deal with it. At this moment, a visitor shocked Daelin. When he finished speaking, Daelin could not believe his ears. Is what you said true? The visitor nodded and left. It was late at night. On the other side of the wetlands, the Paladin Bay was shrouded in darkness. Dark clouds covered the sky, completely blocking every ray of moonlight that attempted to shine onto the sea. Every ship of the Bloodsail fleet was moving up and down rhythmically on the waves. For pirates who made a living on the sea, this was the norm. A large number of pirates pulled out their hammocks in the narrow cabin and slept soundly. The stern of every large ship was, by default, the captain's lounge. Miss Jessie Ferryville was the only heir to Duke Ferryville after her brother was blasted into the sky by the Blackwater pirates. She was already 16 years old, but because she had a little dwarf blood in her, she looked short and strong. Looking at her muscular back, anyone would think that she was a man. Miss Jessie has been very upset lately. She felt that her father had gone mad. He actually sided with the orcs who killed for fun and conquered all the intelligent races in the Azeroth. What was more unacceptable was that the entire Bloodsail pirates seemed to have been kidnapped. Every ship had 2 orcs the size of a small hill watching every captain. They did not understand the human language, but according to the chief of the tribe, if they discovered that the Bloodsail pirates were trying to betray them, they would have to pay the price in blood. Pirates were never clean people. Not bathing for a few months was not a big deal in their long voyages. But the 2 smelly female orcs blocking the door of his room refreshed the lower limit of Jessie's senses. The destructive stench that she had not bathed for many years made it impossible for Jessie to sleep through the door. Jessie could only think of other things to distract herself. I'm going out to sea tomorrow to settle things with Kultiras? Damn it, this is not a duel that father or I want. At this moment, a dagger was silently pressed against her throat, early morning on the 27th of March. Oh, oh, oh. The huge horns that stretched from the top of the orc archer tower to the ground let out a long and deep sound, followed by the sound of drums that shook the sky. Every orc on the coast and every pirate on the sea knew that the day of the final battle had come. Thump, thump, thump. Looking from the ship, it felt as though the whole world was shaking. This was not an illusion. Even at sea, with the ship swaying with the waves, the blood sail pirates could clearly see that the branches on the coast were trembling slightly, the sand on the beach was rising and falling, and the puddles of water in the wetlands seemed to form a layer of waves, shaking violently. The Duke of Fairville stood a short distance from the rudder, gripping the railings of the ship tightly. Earthquake. Even on the sea, Duke Fairville could clearly feel the rumbling of the earth coming from the sea. His first mate shook his head firmly. If this was an illusion, then it was an illusion that the entire bloodsail pirates had tens of thousands of people on board. Ah! That is our invincible horde army. Standing beside Duke Fairville, an orc with a giant axe who seemed to be more intelligent spoke in the common language with an extremely strange accent. The entire bloodsail fleet was in an uproar. All the bloodsail pirates stopped what they were doing and stared in horror at the bright, dazzling green that appeared on the east coast. A moment ago, the endless swamps stretched from the coast to the limits of their vision. In the distance, some unknown substance floated in the shallow swamp, emitting an unpleasant smell into the air. Countless lake-like mud pits had split the green land into a mess, and there was no straight path at all. Now hundreds of thousands of orcs had appeared. They ran wildly, roared, and pushed each other as they swarmed towards the sea from the horizon. They seemed to be driven by the dawn, moving desperately towards the darkness that was about to be driven away. All of the orcs had 2 legs, 2 arms and green skin, but that was the extent of their similarities. Some of the orcs were as large as burly humans, while others had stepped into the category of giants. There were also a few orcs with 2 heads and bloated bodies that were completely at the level of giants. Without exception, all of them ran wildly towards the shore. Chapter 302. The orcs and ogres were very different, but in that green tide they all felt the same. The bloodsail pirates could only see the green tide crossing every swamp with water, stepping on every inch of turf, and smashing everything in its way. Perhaps there were colorful snakes escaping from the swamps under the feet of the orcs, but they were all crushed. Pits, hills, swamps. Everywhere the eye could see, the green orcs surged out like a tide. As the sun climbed higher into the sky, more ships appeared on land. In order to prevent the transport ships they had built from being destroyed by the humans who had the upper hand in the sea, the orcs used a more simple and crude method to protect their ships. These transport ships, which were dozens of tons each, were all placed on the shore and piled up in places where the cannons could not reach. When the orcs were about to launch an attack, the orc laborers would drag the bottom of the ships into the water. The heavy, clumsy but clearly moving transport ships formed a huge wave that slowly moved towards the sea. Watching the fleet sailing on land moving towards them, the bloodsail pirates remained silent and observed everything in front of them in awe. Duke Fairville had lived his entire life at sea, but he had never seen anything like this before. Countless orcs were covering the entire area. They used their strong bodies, arms with explosive muscles, big mouths full of fangs, blood-red eyes and green skin to weave a world-class blanket, covering every corner of the sun. Fairville was filled with regret. He knew that if he had transported this terrifying fleet across the northern continent, the destruction of the humans would have entered the countdown. But beside him, an orc sword saint did not give him any face as he wiped his sword. This was a powerful warrior who killed without batting an eyelid. More than a dozen of his best sailors had tried to kill him, but none of them could get within 2 meters of him. Seeing the transport ships being thrown into the water, Fairville glanced at his daughter Jessie's flagship, which was 50 meters away. Jessie gave him a sign that only he could understand. All fleets weigh anchor. Set sail. The target is the damned fleet of courtiers. Duke Fairville shouted. More than 10 minutes later, in response to the flash of dawn, the entire bloodsail fleet pierced straight into the sea like a curved arc. They were about to sail northward from the Gulf of Baladine, cross the sea that separated the 2 continents, and strike upon the fleet of Courtireth, who must be waiting on the surface. The damp scent of early spring was mixed with the wind and brushed past Orgrim's nose. The undulating waves of the orcs were perfectly connected with the rolling waves of the vast sea. Orgrim was riding a giant white wolf on top of a hill by the sea. From afar, it looked like he was standing on top of the waves. Looking at the shining horizon at the end of his vision, Orgrim couldn't help but feel proud. He pointed his hammer of destruction into the distance and said, "As long as I can cross this ocean, I'll be able to do it. The warriors of the Horde can destroy any resistance from any living creature in any world. We will." The famous Grom Hellscream carried his equally fearsome Bloodhowl axe and came to Orgrim's side. "Even though I've always thought that races other than the orcs are unreliable, and I don't like your attitude towards other races, I like your ability to solve problems." Orgrim didn't seem to care about Grom's complaints. He lightly bumped his huge hammer against Bloodhowl's axe. The two famous weapons of mass destruction let out a dull sound of heavy weapons colliding. "The strongest human kingdom is Lordaeron. See you at Lordaeron." Orgrim bared his teeth. "See you at Lordaeron." Grom didn't look back as he walked down the hill, leaving a trail of deep footprints and a bright silhouette. The orc transport fleet was still sending people in. The Blood Sail fleet and the main orc fleet had already encountered the enemy at around 10 in the morning. An ultralight, fast, elven-styled scout ship appeared on the horizon. Then, just as the Blood Sail fleet sounded the alarm, a sail appeared on the horizon. Duke Fairville furrowed his brows. It was too early. The entire fleet hadn't even left the Paladin Bay before they encountered the full force of Courtiers. It seemed that the Alliance's navy had made up their minds to wipe out the Blood Sail and orc fleets here and regain control of the sea. What's going on? Duke Fairville couldn't help but look at his daughter's flagship half a nautical mile to his right. "But since we've met, let's fight." "Pass the order. Turn right 40 degrees. We need to gain the upper hand." The Duke's order was met with ruthless opposition. An orc who knew the common language slammed his axe against the guardrail. "Don't be so complicated. Just attack. Damn it. Gaining the upper hand is common sense. The Great Horde doesn't need your so-called common sense. We just need you to get close enough to the enemy's ships. The warriors of the Fireblade clan will solve all problems," the orc said in a low, muffled voice. It wasn't that Duke Fairville hadn't heard of a certain orc chief who single-handedly destroyed a few of Courtiers' ships. He just didn't think that the orcs would use such a simple and violent method to solve all problems. This went against all common sense in naval warfare. No, it wasn't just common sense. Fairville could clearly feel the orcs' distrust. That evil great tribal chief was eager for his Bloodsail fleet to perish together with the human fleet, so that the Beastman's transport ships could safely pass through every sea in the world. But the situation was beyond his control. The Duke finally waved his hand. 10 seconds later, a blood-red coat of arms unfurled on his flagship. This idiotic order was immediately sent by the command ships to confirm the flag number again and again. Gritting his teeth, he confirmed. Just like that, the entire Bloodsail and orc fleet split into two columns and charged forward like idiots. The more rational Alliance fleet was like a crab baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. The fleet spread out like a pincer, surrounding the enemy in half an hour. At 10:45 in the morning, the famous Battle of the Paladin Bay began. Chapter 303. Later generations' evaluation of the Battle of Paladin Bay was one-sided. Of course, this was not a traditional naval battle either. The collision of the two ideologies made this naval battle a little strange. Traditional human navies pursued the doctrine of large ships and cannons. The orc navies, on the other hand, played a typical battle with white soldiers. In a sense, the orcs were also very good at this. This was not the cannon before Duquesne's transmigration, which could fire tens of kilometers. Even the World War II gunships couldn't fire at a distance of 20,000 meters. The clumsy, unrifled breech-loading cannons had a range of less than a kilometer. This was not a problem for the orc sword saints who could walk on the waves. Hellscream dismantled a Gundam with its bare hands. Oh, it was Bloodhowl dismantling a warship. This was a good lesson for the orcs. The orc warships were not weak at all against the wind. The cannons on the orc warships were basically decorations. After all, it was just a large transport ship that could move. As soon as they entered 2 nautical miles, many sampans were released from the huge garbage ships. The peons pushed these modified small turtle-shell ships and headed straight for the warships of Courtiers. Human cannons were very useful against ships, but they should have been at a loss against these small ships. Not to mention there were more than a dozen orc sword saints who came on the waves. Admiral Dylin saw that the orcs' tactics were as expected and let out a long sigh of relief. In the sea, tens of meters deep, a blue and white magic light suddenly lit up. This light was so dense that no orc could detect it except for the orc sword saints. The next moment, ice rain rose from the bottom of the sea towards the sky. Bright, beautiful, it had nothing to do with nature, it was accompanied by death. The Murloc Sage's frost arrow had terrible destructive power, but it wasn't a problem for it to pierce through the bottom of a small boat. The Murloc's unique talent could make the seawater open up a path for the frost arrow, allowing it to accurately pierce through the weak bottom of the boat. Ah, good kill. Looking at the small boats that were paddling and trying to get close stop one after another, and the hulls entered the water, Admiral Dylin laughed heartily. It was not that the orc sword saints did not think of taking care of these hindering Murlocs. Firstly, underwater combat was not their forte, and secondly, there were some stronger people to deal with them. Murloc Prophet Magar, Furious Scale Naga Vara, Spiny Naga Syphilis, and a large number of Naga Siren priests were all here. Ha-ha-ho-la-la. Chanting an incantation of unknown meaning, Magar suddenly unleashed a powerful attack. In the sea, the Murlocs and Naga had natural magic bonuses. Not to mention that this was a battlefield that had been set up long ago. At the bottom of the water, inconspicuous conches, clamshells dozens of meters deep, and the most inconspicuous dead corals suddenly emitted the unique brilliance of magic. 2 dots formed a line and many lines formed a pattern. At that time, the Beastman Sword Saint suddenly discovered that there was a huge magic array over 100 square meters in diameter at the bottom of the sea. Wa-la-la-la, the only 3 fingers on each of Magar's hands trembled convulsively. His eyes turned white and a crazed look appeared on his face. The next moment the sea sank. In an instant, the sea level within a radius of 300 meters suddenly sank by more than 30 meters. A huge whirlpool rapidly formed. On the side, the magic stirred up 100-meter wave easily swept everything in the whirlpool into the bottom of the sea. The Sword Saints of the Fireblade clan were powerful, but they did not fight underwater. The bottom of the sea was the world of sea creatures. In the magic array, countless jellyfish-like tentacles rose up, pulling the Sword Saints deeper into the sea. The Sword Saints held their breath and worked hard to cut the jellyfish tentacles in the water with considerable resistance. However, when they cut 1, 3, 5, 10 more would follow. Not to mention that they were a living person, even a big ship might not be able to resist such a strange tactic. Loktar Ogre? If they did not win, they would rather die. None of the orcs showed fear on their faces. Only more orc speedboats attempted to bypass the whirlpool by paddling quickly to kill Kul Tira's fleet. On the flagship, Dalen held a scimitar in his right hand and a short-barreled musket in his left, watching the scene quietly. A calm smile appeared on his face. Well, my old friend, now it's time for you to make a choice. But before that... Whoa! A green phantom approached at high speed. He was so fast that just the splash of water under his feet created a long white line on the surface of the sea. Not a single long-range weapon could hit this elusive figure. Just like that, he crossed the distance of 7 or 8 meters between the sea and the side of the ship like a bolt of lightning and suddenly reached the deck. Naturally, the small fries could not catch him. However, what greeted him was a war hammer with a holy golden glow. Clang. With a deafening clang, the Orc Sword Saint and the newcomer clashed without any fancy moves. I am Paladin Tyrion Fordring. Tell me your name, Orc. Before Duque's transmigration, Tyrion had been called the Empress Dowager by countless players. This was the most powerful moment of his life. The sea breeze ruffled his hair and beard, making this young knight look even more extraordinary. Galeo. The Orc Sword Saint only spat out this name before he immediately charged forward and fought the Empress Dowager. This was not all the orcs had. To catch bandits, one had to catch their leader first. Orcs knew this trick as well. A cold glint of a sword appeared behind Dalen. No one on the ship knew where it came from except Dalen himself. Clang. With an unconventional scimitar, the shining edge of the scimitar perfectly blocked the sharp blade that was supposed to pierce through Danlin's chest. Bang bang. 2 gunshots rang out almost at the same time. The ambusher was a complete idiot. Not only did he fail, he was also hit by a musket. This wasn't an ordinary single-barreled gun. It was meant for a king, so how could it be low-level? Even though the gun was fired with a trigger, the barrel of the gun glowed with the brilliance of a magic circle. The complicated and mysterious blue runes only appeared on the barrel the moment the gun was fired. Moreover, it was a single-barreled gun, but it could fire 2 consecutive shots under the effect of magic. Whoever was hit by it would die. Wow! An Orc Sword Saint with a red flag on his back, a string of huge white beads around his neck, and a single-edged broadsword in his hand groaned as he took 3 steps back and revealed himself. Despicable. He spoke in standard common language. Dalen's handsome face, which had been baptized by the sea breeze, smiled proudly. Hey. I don't want to be called despicable by an orc who only knows how to sneak up on me. We're at most on the same level. Don't you think so? Samuro. That's right. It was the orc sword saint, Samuro. Umph. With a snort, Samuro swung his blade and pounced forward. Chapter 304. The difference in strength between the 7 human kings was huge. The ones who could fight were humanoid nuclear bombs like Antonida's, while the ones who couldn't, such as Tarina's or Eden, would be blown away by the wind. Overall, Thoradin the Great's martial spirit had been passed down. Lang and Salash Trollbane's strength was above average. King Xion's strength was also off the charts after learning to transform, only slightly weaker than Queen Sylvia. Of course, King Dalen was also quite fierce, stepping into the realm of heroes. If it wasn't for the infuriating incident where he betrayed his father, Dalen wouldn't have been killed by Rexer and the other Horde heroes. Now, in a one-on-one battle, Dalen, who was still in his prime, was fighting Samuro. The Horde sent out strong fighters to attack, and the warships of both sides were still closing in on each other. About 1,000 meters away, on Duke Fairville's ship, the beastman in charge of monitoring the Duke gasped when he saw the arc of light from his hero's slash. Huh. I didn't expect the humans to have strong fighters. The beastmen worshipped the strong. To them, a strong fighter could earn their respect beyond their race. 1,000 meters away, a person was just a small dot. But this didn't stop him from knowing that Samuro hadn't taken down the enemy's leader. The humans have more strong fighters than you think, Duke Fairville said coldly. But that doesn't include you, the beastman said harshly. Umph. The Duke snorted, and the beastman's sword saint behind him took a step forward, clearly threatening him. Now you can play your favorite cannon battle. The beastman's arrogant order almost angered Fairville half to death. You're not even giving me the upper hand. Now that your brainless assault team is no longer effective, you want to let my ship take the lead? The frustration and helplessness almost drove Fairville crazy. What else could Fairville do? Right now he and his fleet were like meat on the chopping board. He had to raise his hand and signal that he was ready to fire. Target? The beastman's trash battleships. A cold voice interrupted the Duke's words. Without giving anyone time to react, an ice-cold aura instantly exploded on the ship. A bone-chilling cold swept past everyone's face like lightning, but the only ones who were frozen were the beastmen in charge of guarding and the sword saint. In less than 1/100th of a second, all the beastmen near Duke Fairville had turned into ice sculptures. Every single orc's ferocious expression, their tensed muscles, their half-drawn blades, all the details could be seen clearly. Unfortunately, they were just ice sculptures that had lost their lives. A figure in blue and white robes suddenly appeared less than 3 meters in front of Duke Fairville. Sir Duke Marcus, I didn't expect you, the Alliance's vice commander, to personally take action. The Duke muttered to himself. Duque confidently appeared and raised his hand, casting an icicle spell that was mixed with the characteristics of a tornado, easily sending those beastmen flying over the side of the ship. Just before the ice cubes fell into the sea, a continuous kacha sound stimulated the eardrums of every blood-sail pirate. Right before their eyes, the beastman watchers who had been threatening them for more than a month turned into beautiful ice crystals that dissipated with the wind. With great power comes great responsibility. Even the commander Lothar can charge at the front, so why can't I, the vice commander, do the same? Amidst the laughter, the watchers turned into ashes. The one who killed the watchers on Jesse Fairville's ship was Vanessa Van Cleef. The incompetent little maid who had just returned from a short period of training at Ravenholt Manor had sliced the beastman into 18 pieces with lightning-quick strikes. It wasn't just her. The assassins from MI7 and Stormwind had struck at lightning speed, killing every beastman on every bloodsail pirate ship. One after another, the bloodsail pirate ships raised the flag of the Alliance. At this point, even the slowest of the Horde knew that the bloodsail pirates had rebelled. I told you that humans are unreliable. The beastman captain on the Horde's warship roared angrily. He had the unskilled beastmen change the direction of the huge sails in an attempt to catch up to the bloodsail pirate warships while the wind was against them. The bloodsail pirate fleet was undoubtedly at a disadvantage against the Alliance's naval fleet. However, the bloodsail pirate fleet had the upper hand against the Horde's huge warships. The bloodsail pirate fleet's sudden change of tack brought great trouble to the Horde's warships. The original numerical advantage had instantly turned into a huge disparity in strength. Bang! 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 The Bloodsail pirate fleet opened fire. The huge shrapnel shot toward the masts of the Horde's warships hundreds of meters away. The well-trained and experienced Bloodsail cannoneers easily destroyed most of the masts and sails of the Horde's warships in 2 or 3 rounds of bombardment. The Bloodsail pirate fleet tried their best to steer their ships in an S shape on the sea while trying to distance themselves from the Horde's warships to avoid being hit by the Alliance's cannons. After losing their masts and even their oars were cut off by Duque Naga's trident, the Horde's huge warships were like a pile of garbage floating on the sea, helplessly and hopelessly enduring the Alliance's attacks. At this time, the Bloodsail pirate fleet was the first to cease fire. Why cease fire? Duque frowned slightly. If you knew the structure of the Horde's warships, you would know that cannons are useless against them, Duke Fairville explained. It's all because of those damn goblins. Fairville's eyes flashed with hatred at the mention of those short and greedy green-skinned creatures. The Horde's warships are the masterpiece of those goblins in Booty Bay. Last night, it was Vanessa and Duque who snuck into Jesse's captain's room and learned that the Bloodsail pirate fleet had been forced to join the Horde's camp. In the past winter, Orgrim sent the Horde's army south to Stranglethorn Vale, where the climate was warmer. The despicable goblins did not surrender in the face of the Horde's army. Instead, they made the Horde let go of Booty Bay in a way that Orgrim was very satisfied with. The first thing they did was to sell out their enemy, the Bloodsail pirate fleet. The Horde lacked a fleet, so the evil goblins suggested Orgrim to swallow up the Bloodsail pirate fleet. It was the middle of winter at that time, and almost all the Bloodsail pirate fleet were on land in the Bloodsail fortress. In the end, they were all wiped out by the invincible orcs. Of course, how could an ambitious and ruthless person like Orgrim allow the goblins to be his spear? That was why they had this super warship that Duque called a large piece of garbage. Other than the hull of the ship that was covered with iron sheets and was symbolically equipped with 10 cannons, the rest of the space was a crazy warship that was covered with protective baffles. Chapter 305. From the start, Duque knew that Orgrim's focus was not on the naval battle itself. Win or lose, as long as more than 60% of the transport ships reached the landing site, it would be a victory for the Beastmen. More than 80% would be a crushing victory. Looking at the horizon, Duque could clearly see the Horde's transport ships filling up the entire sea. There were so many of them that it was enough to make one's scalp go numb. Completely ignoring the naval battle, the transport ships headed north at high speed. Every Beastman laborer in the ships rowed with all their might, as if they wanted to vent all their energy on the sea. After receiving a warning from the system genie, Duque set his sights on one of the Beastman warships. He quickly issued a few orders. Vara, have your men use drills to take care of the Beastman warships. I want these rubbish piles to sink into the sea and turn into coral reefs. Magar, after you've dealt with the sacred swordsman, attack the transport ships. Duque turned to Fairville. Don't worry about Dylan and don't worry about your position in the Alliance. As I promised, as long as you fight this battle well, you and your fleet will be under Stormwind's command. A so-called duke who had left his own kingdom and was only left with a noble position in name, and had become a pirate, of course he could not be compared to Duke, who was the most popular person in the Alliance. Fervier bowed deeply, but no one noticed that Fervier's face was twitching in pain. Kurtira's 2nd and 4th fleets, the original Stormwind Kingdom's fleet, and the Bloodsail fleet sailed northeast at high speed. They wanted to send as many Beastmen as possible to the bottom of the sea to feed the fishes while the Beastmen were defenseless. Duque jumped out of the ship, and the surging seawater froze beneath his feet. This time, there was no need to save 50,000 Stormwind soldiers, and Duque did not waste any mana. He only kept the ice within a radius of 50 meters. As the waves surged, Duque bobbed up and down on the ice. Of course, Duque was indeed close to a huge Beastman warship. At this moment, a few huge figures appeared. Duque narrowed his eyes. 2 demonic guards wielding large weapons and 2 even larger apocalypse guards. These 4 demons lined up and surrounded the Beastman warlock in the middle as they floated above the sea. Greetings, human mage, I am Lakama Sharktooth, warlock of the Storm Marauder clan. The old and hunchbacked orc politely placed his left hand on his chest and saluted Duque. Duque frowned. Sure enough, he had messed up the course of the world. Lakama Sharktooth was indeed a famous ranker. Before Ghoul, Dan fell into a coma because of Mediv, he was the unofficial leader of the Shadow Council, second only to Ghoul, Dan. The problem was that in normal history this old warlock was slaughtered by Ghoul, Dan, and used as a test subject to create a Death Knight. Why was he still alive? Furthermore, he was so strong. As if he was disgusted by the surging waves, a terrifying black aura spread out from his body, and the huge waves were completely separated in a radius of 200 meters around him and Duke. It was the sea, but the surface was as calm as a lake. Countless fish and prawns that could not escape in time lost their lives under the dark power and floated to the surface. More than 10 teleportation doors opened around Lakama. More demons came out. More than 100 imps, dozens of burly void walkers, 20 coquettish succubi, and 10 demon hounds. Of course, the most powerful ones were the demonic guards. There were already more than 200 of them and they were still increasing. This was practically a small demon army. Could a demon warlock who specialized in demon element be this powerful? Or should I say, as expected of the former number 2 powerhouse of the Shadow Council? The ice under his feet continued to extend forward. Duque continued to walk forward and answered in a loud voice. Duke Marcus. Reputation was such a thing. No matter how honorable you were, if the other party did not know about you, they would not care about you. Once you were famous, whether it was for fame or notoriety, your name would be your calling card. Once you announced your name, all the notes would appear in the other party's mind. Not many beastmen would know the names of the kings of the 7 kingdoms of the human alliance, even if there were countless beastmen wreaking havoc in the ruins of Stormwind City. Perhaps many beastmen remembered Lothar who had killed the previous great chief, but there was only one human that the entire tribe was familiar with. He was the destroyer of over 200,000 beastmen, the Inferno Apostle in the eyes of the beastmen, the most sinister and cunning great demon king, Duke Marcus. A gurgling sound came from Lakama's throat, followed by a strange demonic cry that was neither human nor beast. Wah! A large amount of dark aura shot out from the gaps between the bone spurs and the muscles on his back. Then Lakama took out a bloody necklace from his space storage and put it around his neck. Duque's pupils suddenly shrank, and the muscles on his face twitched uncontrollably in anger. It was very simple. Every bead on the necklace was a shrunken human head, the head of the Storm Royal Mage Legion. He didn't have any deep relationships with them. Most of them were just nodding acquaintances to Duke, but every single one of them once had the same status as Duke. Using their heads to make a forbidden magic tool was undoubtedly a blasphemy to the entire Stormwind City and even the entire Alliance. Slap, slap. Even though he was not attacked, Duque felt as if he had been slapped multiple times. His entire face was burning and stinging. Hee. Angry? Dissatisfied? No problem, you will soon become one of them. Ever since we fought with you human mages, it has been a lucky day for us warlocks. As long as we concentrate whatever magic circuit you have in your head and customize it, we can increase our spellcasting ability exponentially. Ah! Lakamard laughed wildly and waved his hand. 10 of the largest teleportation portals appeared. 10 terrifying yellow-skinned demons with huge demonic wings stepped through the teleportation portals. The moment they appeared, they cast water float and stared at Duque viciously. Duque suddenly raised his head. I have never liked to torture the souls of my defeated opponents, but for you I have decided to make an exception. Chapter 306. Another warlock, a true beastman powerhouse. In the system notification, the glaring red mark told Duque how dangerous his opponent was. The only good thing was that there was no skull mark on the power comparison panel. This was the era of heroes. Not many of the famous powerhouses were unworthy of their name. Since he knew that his opponent was once the second in command of the Shadow Council, Duque had no reason to hold back. Perhaps the two-headed ogre magician Gujar who came from the dark portal a few months ago was Ghoul, Dan's new favorite, but that was just another name on the list of targets that Duque had to defeat. Inhaling a mouthful of water vapor, Duque immediately saw a dense rain of fireballs whizzing toward him from the group of imps. Duque reached out and drew a line from his left and right, and a translucent wall of water immediately appeared in front of the ice block beneath his feet. It was at least 5 meters tall and 20 meters wide. Duque pushed forward, and the thick wall of water immediately surged forward like a real tide, producing a rumbling sound. As a low-level demon, the fireballs of the imps were not very powerful. Like a cigarette but falling into the water, they were extinguished the moment they hit the wall of water. Umph. Lakama snorted coldly. He actually ignored the situation on the surface of the sea and waved his hand, sending a rain of fire toward Duque's face. Sizzle! The rain of fire fell on the surface of the sea, forming a wall of fire that was larger and thicker than Duque's wall of water. It pushed back in Duque's direction. There was a series of kacha. Continuous sounds of ice shattering could be heard. The frozen sea in front of Duque was completely shattered. The huge force caused the shattered ice to roll back toward Duque. It was as if there was a hailstorm in front of Duque. However, the ice cubes did not fall. They were decomposed by the high temperature in midair. They first turned into snow powder, then instantly sublimated into water vapor, and finally turned into nothingness. Duque knew that Lakama had found out the difference in strength between the two sides. That's right, in terms of the quality of his magic, Lakama should be at the peak of the Morning Star realm. With the addition of the necklace made from the heads of more than 10 human wizards, Lakama's strength had risen sharply. In terms of the total amount of magic, he should be at the level of a first-rank Radiant Moon wizard. Duque sneered. I won't lose in terms of total magic power. The next moment, Lakama's demon hounds charged. When warlocks fought against mages, they basically relied on these evil dogs. The devil hound was a piece of cake for physical-type professions. This kind of dog-shaped demon that was entirely red, had 2 horns and 2 strange tentacles. There was nothing outstanding about it in terms of attack, defense, speed, and so on. In fact, it was even below the average standard of most demons. The most disgusting thing about the devil hounds was that they were anti-magic. It was not appropriate to say that magic was forbidden. To be more precise, the demon hounds could emit an elemental light wave to disrupt the spellcasting of mages. Not only did it prevent low-level mages from absorbing the elements of the elemental realm, but it could also take advantage of the mage's spellcasting to send chaotic energy currents into the mage's magic circuit. To put it bluntly, it was a *T stirring stick. Disgusting but effective. Every devil hound stared at Duque, trying to attack when Duque was chanting and give Duque a greater blow. However, they were disappointed. In other words, Duque's attack was beyond the imagination of these low-intelligence dog-shaped demons. Duque did not use any magic himself. It was all done by the system elf. Without any warning, 108 magic hands appeared neatly behind Duque. The magic hands glowed with a faint blue arcane light. Dazzling light flashed between the fingers, and the devil hounds that were dozens of meters away from the magic hands were pierced by huge ice spikes that protruded from the surface of the sea. After the ice spikes that were as thick as the mouth of a bull pierced through their hearts, more ice spikes pierced the devil hounds. Lakama's face darkened. The magic resistance of the demon hounds was quite high. In contrast, their physical resistance was terrible. Turning ice magic into a physical form to attack the devil hounds showed that Duque had rich experience in fighting against demon warlocks. Despite Duque's title of Beastman Butcher, Duque rarely fought in magic battles. Apart from the 100-armed Reaper, whose strength was unknown, this was the first time Duque fought against a warlock on an official occasion. Lakama instinctively thought of Duque as a weakling from the academy. Arctic extension. Duque shouted. This time he finally made a move himself. Without the hindering devil hounds, he did not have to worry about being interrupted. Even with the help of the system, Duque was very confident that he could quickly adjust the chaos of the magic circuit. However, he did not want to be silenced if he could. Warlocks could grind down energy consumption. Demon warlocks were the most shameless of all warlocks. What was supposed to be a one-on-one fight turned into a group fight. It would be great if he could play as a mower, but he was afraid of other things. Just as Duque turned the second wave of succubi and devil guards into ice sculptures. Lakama, who was on the other side, quickly used hand gestures and evil incantations to cast curses and magic. Most shaman orc warlocks seemed to like to attach curses and other curse rings to certain totem poles. When necessary, they could draw them back from the totem poles. Thus, their casting speed was extremely fast. Almost at the same time, Duque also felt the changes in his body. Pain, convulsions, fatigue, heat, weakness. Looking at the series of negative statuses that appeared on his retina, Duque felt like he was about to burst into tears. You are affected by the curse of pain, you are affected by the curse of fatigue. There were more than 10 curses of various sizes and 7 to 8 negative statuses. Even if there were 100 orcs, their life force would be drained in an instant, let alone a human like Duque. Without hesitation, Duque immediately activated the ice barrier. A cold sensation instantly spread throughout his body. Apart from the ice element, all other elements and powers were instantly expelled from his body. Lakama snorted coldly. He was originally planning to wait for the invincibility of the ice barrier to end before giving Duque all the curses and debuffs. Who knew that a storm that he had never seen before would engulf his demon army? White frost, red flames, and purple arcane magic. 3 different elements were perfectly blended together and shot towards his demon army. Frostfire arrow? It was not that Lakama had never seen this spell before. It was a damaging spell that absorbed the essence of 3 different types of magic at the same time. It was very effective against any type of enemy. If it could be used consecutively, even a demon warlock with a high defense would have a headache. Now Lakama had a headache. Chapter 307. Duque, who had frozen himself in the ice, was still standing there like an ice sculpture, but Lakama could hear the chanting of spells in unison. It was the same voice as Duque's. The chanting was so clear that Lakama could even hear every syllable. The question was, who was chanting? In the air there were no people or mouths. There were only 108 hands of magic. The white elemental hands pushed the tricolored energy balls in their palms forward, and Lakama saw a storm forming. A storm of frostfire arcane arrows. Each of his attacks had the power of a peak sky mage at full strength. It was the same as 108 peak sky mages attacking at the same time. Lakama's green face turned dark green. The huge and glamorous light spun at a high speed, crossed the sea, and pierced through the bodies of the demons who had been buffed by water float. In an instant, they were torn into pieces and fell into the sea like a rain of blood and flesh. Almost immediately, Lakama's demons were left with only the strongest apocalypse guards. These huge yellow-skinned demons flapped their long bat wings and withstood this round of attacks with some difficulty. Lakama raised his hand, and the huge apocalypse guards charged at Duque at a high speed. However, a second and third round of frostfire arrows poured down on the apocalypse guards. Lakama watched in shock as his demon army, which was enough to destroy an entire army of 5,000 humans, was beaten down by the storm of magic arrows released by the hands of magic. Duque ended ice barrier. Lakama's fear worked. Duque fell into a terrifying illusion like an idiot and spun around on the ice like a drunkard. Although his willpower was quite impressive, he recovered in a second. Logically speaking, a mage who was in a state of mental confusion could not continue to cast spells. But Duque did it. The 36 hands of magic formed a group to release frostfire arrows, never stopping from beginning to end, and automatically aimed at the enemy to pour fire. There was no problem with the accuracy. It was as if every frostfire arrow was controlled by a mage. Regardless of whether the apocalypse guard dodged or blocked, the frostfire arrow would automatically adjust its angle and accurately hit the apocalypse guard's weak spot. At this moment, Lakama almost suspected that Duque had done the same thing as him, enslaving a group of mages and using their souls to cast spells for him. Unfortunately, there was no time for Lakama to hesitate. He gritted his teeth and unleashed all the curses and negative spells he had stored on the totem pole on Duque. Duque's crown of ice magic circuit spun rapidly, instantly activating rapid cooldown. This gave Duque the capital to activate ice barrier again. The powerful ice element once again drove away all the curses. Then, you finished casting instant curses? His magic power was depleted? Pray then, damn the greenskins. Here comes the punishment of destruction. Along with Duque's angry roar, the 10 arcane circuits, the 100 arcane circuits, and the entire arcane throne magic circuit rumbled. How many times did the massive arcane energy circulate in a second in the magic circuit? How many times did the explosive energy that was akin to a nuclear generator increase? Duque had already lost count. As if responding to the rage of the morning star Duque, the sky suddenly turned dark. Dark clouds gathered, lightning flashed, and thunder rumbled. A dazzling purplish-blue light burst forth from Duque's body. This light was so glaring that Lakama could barely open his eyes. This was the top-grade metamagic ability, Arcane Energy Storm. It was a powerful attack that overloaded the entire arcane circuit and increased the energy consumption by 50%. Without hesitation, Lakama summoned 20 Voidwalkers in one go. Then, with a wave of his hands, he sacrificed all of them to form a huge protective shield around his body. Lakama was very clear that even an entire group of wizards would not be able to break through the huge protective shield that he had sacrificed 40 precious soul fragments to create. In theory, this was impossible. Even the 2 powerful wizards that he had discovered in South Shore that day, Kel'Thuzad and Krasus, could not do it. Now, Duque gave him a feeling that he could kill him in one blow. Lakama really wanted to summon another demon hound to harass Duque, but he could not do it. The arcane energy that exploded from Duque's body was so strong that it actually started to repel the existence of all the other elements in this area. The space became unstable. To a demon warlock who relied on summoning demons for a living, this was definitely a nightmare. No. Suddenly ripping the necklace off his neck, Lakama roared, "Fools! I order you to stop him." The badge of the royal family of storm mages on Duke's robe shone brightly under the light of the arcane spell. The enslaved souls seemed to have regained their sanity for a short moment. They roared angrily and then rejected Rakarma's order. Circles of arcane light shrunk back into Duke's right palm. The strange shrinking feeling was like a giant balloon shrinking to the size of a palm. Lakama instinctively felt that something was wrong. He really wanted to do something to Duke, but unfortunately, whether it was his shadow arrow or scorching pain, none of his attacks could directly break through Duke's ice barrier. Finally, Duke blasted out that attack. He did not know if this was the 7-layered Frostfire arrow or the 7-layered Arcane Impact that was infused with ice and fire elements. A terrifying red, white, and blue magic energy ball that was twice the size of a carriage burst out from Duke's hand. It instantly evaporated the ice in front of him and the seawater near Lakama. The sailors and officers of the First Fleet who had not left the battlefield, the Empress Dowager Theon Dylan, and the Orc Sword Saint Samuro, all stopped fighting at the same time and watched the unforgettable scene on the surface of the sea. A white line visible to the naked eye appeared on the surface of the sea in the distance. The white line was not long, only a few dozen meters long. However, it split to the left and right, forming a horrifying deep valley that almost reached the coral reefs at the bottom of the bay. It was only a few meters away from the bottom of the sea. The deep valley was at least 30 to 40 meters wide. On both sides of the deep valley were two parallel waterfalls that were repelled by powerful magic. Damn it. Just a little bit more and it would be the legendary Ocean Division. Everyone's eyes widened and they forgot to breathe. Time seemed to have frozen at this moment. Until Lakama, who was fighting with Duke, turned into ashes. Until the huge cylindrical valley was once again covered by the seawater, time seemed to have returned to normal. Chapter 308. The magic battle left all the onlookers dumbfounded. Although they had already sensed the power of this orc warlock, no one knew that their own alliance deputy commander was not easy to deal with either. For a moment, Kul Tira's fleet was filled with cheers. Samuro retreated. The opponent's king was quite difficult to deal with. He could not kill the king and the king could not do anything to him. It had to be said that the king's fighting style was quite novel. He actually threw out barrels of explosives from their expensive space storage bags and detonated them with muskets. The violent, large-scale explosion was indeed a big problem for a sword saint with high attack speed like Samuro. Samuro was also injured. Since he could not take it down, Samuro retreated. He had a better target, Duke, who had just used all his strength to kill Lakama Sharktooth. Duke Marcus, recognized as the strongest enemy in the eyes of the orcs. His original titles of Schemer and Sage were all removed. After this battle there was only one label for Duke and that was Strong. Just like how there was a famous general above the fierce general and the wise general. In the eyes of all the orcs, Duke was the most worthy human to be hunted. He was like the brightest pearl on the crown. Samuro did not even look back and threw an arrow at Duke, who was bending over and panting. For a moment, Duke thought he might die again. At this time Dalen made his move. He slowly slashed out the scimitar in his right hand. There was no powerful sword aura, nor the shocking power that could split the sea. It was like an ordinary captain waving his sword and ordering the entire ship to open fire. For a moment, Duke thought he would hear the loud but actually useless sound of cannonballs. But there was none. Instead, behind Samuro's high-speed forward body, a huge green ghost ship appeared in the void at high speed. Ghost ship? In this fantastical world, ghosts were not rare. Duke's Karazhan also had a ghost pet called Khadgar. However, this huge specter ship, which was made up of strange negative energy that was close to dark energy, did not have a physical body in the real sense. It was like a phantom that was purely used to scare people. It flew out of the void at high speed and crashed into the back of Samuro, who was also rapidly hiding and dodging outwards. There was a loud sound like a balloon exploding and then it disappeared. It didn't seem to be of any use. A few seconds later, Duke was shocked to see Samuro fall into the sea. This was an orc sword saint hero with an indomitable will. Could it be that he could steal the kill? Mog. Duke was about to summon the Murloc prophet to finish him off, but he suddenly realized that Samuro had just fallen into the sea and was rescued by another sword saint orc. Without even turning his head, he used the wave-like subtle steps to run away from Duke. *CK. This young master's reputation. Duke didn't know what the system notification meant for Kul Dila's reputation and Delen's affection. Anyway, Duke didn't mind doing it if he could gain some reputation in the alliance. Arcane Energy Storm was indeed a move for risking his life. It wasn't something a human could do to overload an already powerful arcane circuit. The chaotic energy was hot and crazy. Duque felt a stabbing pain all over his body and he couldn't even walk. Unable to act cool anymore, Duque could only wait for Kuldilas to send someone to save him. At first, Duque thought that he could only stand on the ice and wait for 5 minutes. Unexpectedly, a beautiful golden-haired female high elf came. She used flash continuously and landed next to Duque lightly and gracefully. "You're Lady Golden Sword?" Duque recognized her as the female mage who often stayed by Dellen's side. Gina Golden Sword nodded slightly at Duque. "Come." Duque immediately sensed that the surrounding frost elements were stirring. Asterisk whoosh whoosh whoosh. Asterisk theoretically, Gina was continuously casting icicles, but Duque felt like he was sitting on a hovercraft. The ice beneath his feet was the boat, and the icicles behind him were the driving force. After being around for so long, Duque finally realized that high-ranked mages could continuously cast icicles and use them as a blower. Looking at Gina Golden Sword, Duque really wanted to say, "This is my knee for today. Please keep it." Thanks to Kuldila's court archmage, Duque boarded Dellen's messy flagship in just 3 minutes. Leaning on his machete, Dellin smiled at Duque. "I haven't exercised in a long time. Fortunately, my skills haven't deteriorated. But that orc sword saint is quite powerful. If I were 5 years older, I might die for my country." Gina Golden Sword glared at Dellin. At this moment, the roar of cannons came from afar. Obviously, the ships that had gone to stop the orc transport fleet had engaged in battle. "Let's go over too. If there's anything, let's finish this damn war first." Dellen's words made Duque shudder. From what Duque could tell, Dellin was not planning to let go of his old friend from the Bloodsail fleet. Duque gritted his teeth. The Alliance will not let go of any human enemy. Similarly, the Alliance will not mistreat anyone who contributes to the Alliance. This meant that Duque was prepared to protect Duke Fairville to the death. Sigh. Dellin sighed as he patted Duque's shoulder. "Duque, I'm not that inflexible. In the face of the threat of the human race's destruction, my personal grudges are nothing. All I want to say is that you don't understand Fairville." Duque suddenly understood. The people who understood you the most were not your family or friends, but your enemies. This was a strange feeling. Duque could not guess what it was, nor did he have the time to guess. The Horde's frenzy had arrived once again. If they did not want the entire northern continent to be flooded by the green tide, they had to first use their naval advantage to weaken the beastmen as much as possible on the surface. A considerable number of male Nagas were arranged to help Duque count the beastmen's warships in the Baladine Bay. The numbers were shocking. There were more than 25,000 transport ships of all sizes. More than half of them were empty ships used as pretenses. There were no more than 10 beastmen laborers and no other beastmen. Even so, there were at least 100,000 laborers in order to control more than 10,000 empty ships. Only the Horde, where human lives were as cheap as ants, would do such a thing. Just as Duque was on Dellen's warship and following Kurtiraz's first fleet to join the battle, a shocking piece of news arrived. The transport ships that rushed out of the Baladine Bay did not all go to South Shore. Instead, they split into 3 groups. About 40% went west, and were expected to land on the South Flow coast. 40% went in the direction of South Shore. The remaining 20% went into the long strait between the northern and southern continents. Duque shuddered. The thing he was most worried about had happened. The beastmen had split up. Chapter 309. Every battleship roared, their cannons flashing with dazzling yellow light. As the huge solid cannonballs were fired, thick smoke rose into the air. Accompanied by a deafening roar, the barrels of the cannons were pushed back violently. Black arcs of light traversed hundreds of meters in the air and bombarded the transport ships. The continuous explosions of cannonballs tore through the air, completely drowning out the roaring sea breeze. Dragging the black arcs of light behind them, the metal balls dancing in the air became unmistakable emissaries of death. Cannonballs were like grim reapers who placed human lives on a scale. The difference was that one side was luck and the other side was death. Whether it was a huge splash that brushed past one's body, or whether it was a direct hit and one was killed in the sea, this was like a metaphysical game. In a sense, being killed by a cannonball was also a kind of luck. At least they did not have to endure this endless torture. The cannonball flew above their heads and fell beside them, creating huge splashes of water. Missed? In less than 2 seconds after the explosion, a new round of horrifying roars was approaching from afar. Did they pray to their ancestors? After drinking the blood of unknown origins and turning their skin green, Would their ancestors still bless them? Unknowingly, these seemingly endless cannonballs had become the greatest torture for the orcs. If this was the first time they were fighting on the sea, perhaps the orcs would be dumbfounded and would just paddle the boat forward. But with the first disastrous defeat and the shadow of the landing battle looming over them, the surviving orcs inevitably began to panic. As a paddling ship, the most terrifying thing was that the two sides of the ship were not uniform. The direct result of this was the ship spinning around on the sea like a blind fly. The orc fleet was in chaos. It was not that there were no orc commanders who tried to organize small boats to attack the Alliance's fleet, but after Kurtirz's fleet suffered a huge loss last time, the orc transport ships were no longer blocked by a single row of careless and weak ships. Instead, they were blocked by two rows of ships. Not only that, the deranged General Dalin had also changed the structure of half of the fleet. Originally, for the sake of the cannonball battle between fleets, Kurtirz's fleet had basically distributed the cannons on the left and right sides equally. Now, considering that they would have to take part in the most brutal battle after the artillery bombardment, Dalin moved almost all the cannons to the starboard side. The port side relied on the ballast to maintain the balance of the ship. In other words, as long as the Alliance's fleet could not gain the upper hand and seize the T position, the port side, which only had a few cannons left, would basically be defeated the moment they encountered the enemy. Dalin was bold but careful. On one hand, he didn't think that the Bloodsail fleet that had surrendered to the orcs would have much fighting power. On the other hand, he was confident in his commanding skills. Now he had made the right bet. Even an ordinary destroyer could have more than 30 cannons on one side. This kind of firepower was simply crazy. The spherical cannonball spun in the air, and like the punishment of God, it ruthlessly flew towards the small orc transport ship that was trying to rely on its agility to execute the ant-encirclement tactic. Boom. Because of the rush, the materials used in the new batch of transport ships were mostly skimped on. Originally, the Beastman's ships were thick and hard. Now, because of the lack of materials and the excessive pursuit of quantity, even the hardness was gone. Logically speaking, it was impossible for a seemingly huge transport ship to be blasted from the deck to the bottom of the ship by a cannonball. But reality was right in front of them. The coarse and thin deck was easily blasted into the sky, mixed with the broken pieces of wood and orc flesh, splattering in all directions like a storm. There was no need to rely on the explosion of gunpowder, nor was there any need to use the spiral drilling force created by the rifling. Just the pure and violent kinetic energy alone was enough to send a transport ship that could carry dozens or even hundreds of people to the bottom of the sea. The scourge of skimping on materials had also spread to the orcs' giant ironclad transport ships. Originally, with the thick and heavy armor, the cannonball wouldn't be able to cause any substantial damage even if it didn't ricochet. But after the armor was thinned, the pig iron plates that weren't official armor became the biggest killer. The more brittle pig iron was instantly shattered into thumb-sized pieces after being hit by the cannonball, and they splattered into the hold of the ship with the impact of the cannonball. The orc warriors, who were crammed into the hold of the ship like sardines, became the biggest victims. Under this kind of shrapnel attack that exceeded the limits of their physical endurance, large numbers of orcs were killed like wheat being harvested. But most of them were heavily injured and unable to continue fighting. If it was on a land battlefield, the violent and brave orcs would usually choose to perish together with their enemy. However, this was the sea. Other than their own people, there were only the bowl-sized bullet marks left by the stray bullets in the ship's cabins within a radius of a dozen meters. Sitting on Dalin's ship, listening to the information sent by the various mages, Duque's expression was still as calm as still water. There's good news and bad news. Dalin pursed his lips. A man at sea always starts with the bad news. Alright, the bad news is that you have to decide how to distribute the fleet now. If you let more than 8,000 transport ships land on the South Stream coast, Tarinas and Xeon will immediately come to kill you. And the good news? At this rate, we have a chance to let more than half of the orcs sink to the bottom of the sea to feed the fishes. Dalin whistled. I'll leave the Second Fleet and Storm Fleet at South Shore for you to deploy. Leave those that pass through the straits, and I'll pull the rest to the other side of the South Stream coast. Duque pondered for a moment. Dalin still refused to let go of the Heartsail pirates, so this was the only way. Promise me. Don't worry, I'll treat them fairly even if they're forced to kill my Third Fleet. Duque stared at Dalin for a moment and finally nodded. On the battlefield, the opportunity was fleeting. There was no time to hesitate. The situation here was also reflected in the command center of South Shore. Lothar gritted his teeth and looked at Lang. General Lang, can I give you the best defense line in South Shore? Lang looked at his childhood friend. Lothar's battle in the past year was still vivid in his mind. Lang patted Lothar's shoulder. I'm not a child who has been on the battlefield for the first time. If such a good defense can be penetrated, I'd rather die. No, I don't want you to die, Lang punched Lothar in the chest. Go General Lothar. The Alliance needs you. Without further hesitation, Lothar called out to Turalian. Let's go. Our destination is the South Stream coast. With almost all of his cavalry, Lothar had to reach the Shadowfang citadel before the horde landed. The cruelest battle was about to begin. Chapter 310. At first glance, the attack on South Shore was shockingly similar to the Battle of South Shore the year before. In fact, when Duque received the banner of the tribe, Duque really looked down on the attacking tribes. Simply put, none of them were in the top 10. At first, Duque thought that hanging Blackhand's head would at least attract Blackhand's two brainless sons, Red Blackhand. None. There wasn't even a well-known tribe. The chiefs of the smaller tribes who were loyal to the former chief paid the price for their ignorance. They were all used as pawns by Orgrim to feign an attack. No Death Knights, no ogres, no warlocks. Duque could imagine that no matter how many of these fools there were, they would not be able to win against South Shore, which had been fortified for more than a year. Do not underestimate the difference between the top 10 tribes and the tribes below, and do not think that the combat power of the orcs was similar. Why was it that the higher-ranked tribes were, the better they were at fighting? Only the most powerful tribes could occupy the best territory and the fattest herds. On the other hand, because of the good territory, they could afford to raise more warriors and tribesmen. This situation was like a rolling snowball. Unless they lost a lot of long-range warriors, it would be difficult for them to decline. Generally speaking, the official warriors of the top 10 tribes, even the females, were rarely less than 2 meters tall. However, the warriors of the tribes below were at most 10% or 20% stronger than the orc laborers. On the morning of the 29th of March, the Second Battle of South Shore began. Duque's face was ashen. It was not because South Shore's defense line was tight. On the contrary, it was impregnable. Lang, the general of the army, still had the time to chat with Duque. What made Duque angry was that Lothar had taken away almost all the elites of the Alliance. Those who were left in South Shore were basically infantrymen. There were 80,000 soldiers from Stormwind, 30,000 infantrymen from Lordaeron, Duque's new Storm Mage Legion, and the disorganized Lordaeron's 3rd Cavalry Regiment with only 1,500 cavalrymen. All the other elites, including High Lord Mograine, had been transferred to the South and North Stream coasts. How could Lothar do this to me? Didn't I repeatedly tell him not to bet so easily? Before we confirm Orgrim's flag, we can't bet our elites. Duque lost his temper. Lang was slightly stunned. I'm confident that I can defend South Shore. I don't think there's anything wrong with Anduin pulling the other elites away. Also, when Tarinas and Jane heard that there were 200,000 orcs heading that way, they were so worried that they sent at least 10 magic messages an hour. Duque slammed the table and said, "That's the key. I admit that the beastmen wouldn't lie to us. But Orgrim was definitely a leader with brains. He didn't like sacrificing a lot in exchange for so-called glory." In Stormwind City, he was the one who suggested going around the east and north sides of Stormwind City. Duque didn't want to talk about the Battle of Stormwind City either. That was King Lang's eternal pain. Lang's handsome face twitched slightly, but he nodded. Indeed, from then on, I felt that the Horde's actions were often contradictory. One moment it was reckless, the next it was cautious. The reckless one was the mastermind. The cautious one was Orgrim, who was the deputy at the time. Indeed. This also explains why the first battle in South Shore happened. Lang frowned. So you're saying that the main force of the Horde was sent to the other side of the strait? No, those must be empty ships. Duque was very sure. Then, once these ships pass through the strait between the north and south and pass under the Solder Bridge, they will return to the northeast corner of the wetlands where they can land and carry the Horde over from there. Duque drew a line from the south to the north on the military map. The final destination was the east coast of the hinterlands. Seeing this line, Clayan, General Tom Simois, and General Abendis all sucked in a breath of cold air. The cold air invaded their lungs, making them feel like they were spitting ice cubes out of their mouths and noses. Those who could get to the rank of general were all brainless boors. Of course, everyone knew what this meant. Due to the huge pressure that Lordaeron and King Tarinas Menethil were about to face, Lothar had no choice but to withdraw most of the Alliance's army to deal with the Horde's frontal attack. If the Horde's main army ignored them, the orcs could march straight in and kill their way to Lordaeron's capital within a week, destroying this core kingdom of the Alliance. On the other hand, if they blocked the orcs from the front, the horde would land in the hinterlands. In this area where the Alliance had no control at all, the Alliance would still collapse if the horde was allowed to do as they pleased. In the hinterlands, the horde could fully utilize their advantage in fighting in the mountains. If they headed west, they could directly attack Alterac, which was the weakest of the 7 human kingdoms of the Alliance. If everything went smoothly, they could also go around the hinterlands and earthy highlands, which even the orcs could not cross, and attack the earthy highlands instead. If they could destroy the defense of Solder Bridge from the back, they could break through the land blockade of the northern and southern continents, and draw all the orc troops from the southern continent over. If they could deal with Alterac, there would be many options in front of the horde. They could attack the Stormwind refugee camp in Hillsbrad, or head west to attack the Dalagen. With Lothar withdrawing most of the main army, the horde would be able to move freely. The more Lang and the others watched, the more frightened they became. General Abendis raised a question. Deputy Commander-in-Chief, didn't you ask General Trobane to deploy a large number of catapults and ballistae along the strait? The strait is so narrow that even the horde's empty ships can't easily pass through, right? Duque pursed his lips and said after a long time, I know Orgrim. He must have a way to pass through the strait. Although I don't know why, I have already deployed my strongest long-range troops there. If the situation becomes critical, I will rush over with the Storm Royal family's mages. This was also the sorrow of a transmigrator. Did Duque not know what it was? Of course he knew. The problem was that after Medivh was possessed, Duque could use I can sense evil to explain a lot of things. However, Duke did not have enough evidence to convince the other parties of the Horde's next move. The alliance was not founded by Lothar and Duque. At the end of the day, the alliance was still a collection of kingdoms. Even if Duque had fought a beautiful battle to prove himself, he still could not use intuition, or speculation, to command every army in the alliance. I think this is a typical woodpecker tactic. While creating a diversion, they would drive the enemy to the place they wanted. Chapter 311. Looking at Duque's distressed expression, Lang understood. He patted Duque's shoulder. I believe in you. Believe in you. It was just a few simple words, but they were extremely heavy. This was not the trust of an ordinary person. This was the trust of a king with all the power of the kingdom. Lang used practical actions to show his support for Duque. Tom, I want you to use an elite regiment and a few new regiments to block the Horde's attack on South Shore. Can you do that? Under normal circumstances, General Seamus would definitely spit at this. Sending a rookie regiment to die was a task that could be easily won as long as the main force was deployed. This was a completely blind command. Seamus now understood that Lang was deliberately saving strength for the Battle of the Hinterlands that Duque had mentioned. Seamus nodded. I will withdraw the Griffin regiment as a reserve. Abendis was also very conflicted. He looked at Lang, then at Duque. Recalling all the miracles that Duque had done in the past, he felt a little helpless. All right, I will withdraw my elite regiment as well. Thank you. Duque quickly calculated. With the full support of Lang and Abendis, along with emergency support when necessary, it should be barely enough. Duque turned to his deputy Windsor. Given that the Horde intends to send transport ships through the strait between the northern and southern continents, it is very likely that the Horde will launch an aerial attack on the southern defensive line of Stormguard. At the same time, if the transport ships pass through the strait, the Horde will launch a landing operation targeting the hinterlands. I hope that General Trollbane can consider the situation and send more support from Rapidsburg. The earthy highlands and the hinterlands were separated by high mountains, and there were many elemental creatures that ran around and attacked anyone they saw. It was quite troublesome to mobilize troops. Moving troops through the mountains was much more troublesome than moving troops by sea. If they wanted to mobilize troops, they could only do it now. It would be too late. Duque gave the order to Windsor, which meant that he was the Alliance's vice commander-in-chief. This kind of transfer order would not only be communicated through magic, but it would also be sent out by Griffin cavalry. It was the highest level of transfer order that the Alliance had decided internally. Salash Trollbane could choose not to listen out of selfishness, but if there was a problem, his Riptide Castle would cry. After Duque finished speaking, everyone was still worried. Using the Air Force to destroy the ground defense was very effective. It wasn't like everyone had never seen a Griffin before. The Griffin's attack power was also quite terrifying. The problem was that the Alliance didn't have many Griffins. There were only 200 to 300 Griffins in the Alliance combined, and they were usually used as scouts. No king would be willing to send griffins into the battlefield. Moreover, how could the tribe have a large-scale air force? However, Duque had a confident expression on his face. Lang and the others were puzzled. However, they would soon find out. When they used their unparalleled art of war to repel several waves of orc attacks and replace their troops, something happened to the Solder Bridge defense line. From the distance, the Horde had entered the strait earlier, but Stromgard's defense line was set up with the Solder Bridge as the center. This caused the Riptide Castle army to enter the battle a step later than South Shore. Whoosh! The huge projectile vehicle used its long mechanical arm to throw a large basket of rocks the size of a human head at the Horde's transport ship in the center of the strait. The Horde's transport ship hadn't actually entered the firing range yet. Obviously, the Horde laborers inside were frightened or for some other reason. A large number of transport ships stopped outside the firing range of the Riptide Castle's long-range weapons. Haha. I didn't expect the Horde to actually send transport ships. I thought this line of defense was wasted. The soldiers from Riptide Castle laughed loudly. During the time they guarded the Solder Bridge, the Riptide Castle people used a large number of ballistae, catapults, and cannons, and actually trained batches of engineers, artillerymen, and ballistae who were very good at operating. This was an unexpected gain. After all, these people were originally just farmers. King Salash Trollbane was a man who knew his soldiers well. As the first human country to receive the attack report among the 6 northern kingdoms, King Salas had always attached great importance to the orcs. After receiving the official transfer order from Duque, Salas immediately agreed to Duque's request. He obeyed the transfer order and sent an integrated infantry regiment of 5,000 soldiers to Duque. In addition, he urgently mobilized a large number of ballistae and 5 archer companies to the Solder Bridge defense line, forming a deep formation to deal with the possible air attack. Air attack? What air attack? The Riptide Castle soldiers and generals were all confused. They just followed the order in a daze. According to the Alliance's deputy commander's order, all archers and ballistae had to be spread out. The same went for the ballistae. Before firing, the ballistae should be covered with a large number of branches and leaves to hide. What the hell was this? This completely subverted the military common sense of this era. Humans were not like the elves. Unless they were hunters or elites who had trained for more than 3 years, most human archers were terrible at shooting. Ordinary arrows would not be able to hit more than 20 meters away. Often, they could only rely on sharpshooters to lead the way and fire at a certain area on a large scale to make up for their lack of marksmanship. A scattered archer had no power to speak of. This was common knowledge in the military of the human race. Now, the archers of the Riptide Castle were scattered, carrying doubts. They were even more puzzled as to why most of the ballistae on the edge of the cliff were incomplete or broken, and a large number of straw men wearing the armor of the Riptide Castle soldiers. It did not take long for their doubts to be resolved. The Horde really had an air force. Look! Following the exclamation of an archer, countless people saw many black dots appear in the horizon against the rising sun. In just a few breaths, these black dots rapidly enlarged in their field of vision, turning into black flying birds with their wings spread wide. However, they were already so big even though they were so far away in the sky. One could only imagine their true size. Stay calm. Stay calm. Stay at your posts. Everything is within Deputy Commander Duque's expectations. For a moment, no one knew which officer shouted like this. Miraculously, the restless and panicked army quickly calmed down. Duke Marcus, a magical name. This name represented the bloody heads of more than 200,000 orcs, and also represented the Alliance's victory. Thinking of the previous strange arrangement, the soldiers suddenly realized that their commander had expected this. The soldiers did not have such a long-term vision. As long as they knew that this was a prepared battle, they would not panic so easily. Chapter 3:12. No soldier would dislike a commander-in-chief who always had the upper hand and could predict the enemy like a god. This meant a greater victory and a lesser sacrifice. Those terrifying shadows approached at high speed, swooping down from the clouds at high speed. Their huge bodies carried a terrifying aura. Before they could see the true faces of the attackers, a blazing aura had descended from the sky. The turbulent turbulence was full of the flames of death. As soon as it fell on the bait ballistae, not only did the huge ballistae instantly break into pieces, but even large areas of the surrounding area rose in flames. There seemed to be a distant roar from ancient times rising in everyone's heart. This sharp roar came from the distant history of the world of Azeroth, from the chaotic world that had yet to have human beings. This was the declaration of a terrifying existence that had been at the top of the entire world's food chain since ancient times. The terrible coercion from the higher creatures could easily push everyone's heart into darkness, destroying every remaining trace of reason in the depths of their hearts. Breathing stopped because of the terror. Their hearts forgot to relax after contracting into a ball due to extreme nervousness. Their blood surged in all directions due to fear. At the same time, his sight, hearing, taste, smell, and other senses of the body were all temporarily gone. Everyone was in a daze, almost forgetting themselves as they sank into a white fog. In a secret stronghold that had been rebuilt from a cave, a blonde figure was equally nervous. She unconsciously pressed her hands between her perky breasts. But very soon, her delicate face that had lost all color was flushed with excitement. Her eyes followed the huge figures moving at high speed. Like a hunter locking onto her prey, she stared closely at this scene, as if she was afraid to miss any tiny detail. It was hundreds of crimson flying dragons wreaking havoc on the torrential castle's position. They flapped their wings and stretched their necks, venting the flames of destruction on the whole land. Their huge golden eyes were like huge amber balls, and their black vertical pupils carried a unique coercion of higher creatures. She seemed to see their reluctance, resistance, and anger, but for some magical reason, they had to obey the command of the despicable and crude orc knights on their backs. Dragons were naturally arrogant, and it was hard to imagine that they would allow any creature to ride on their backs and act like a tyrant. Not to mention the orcs who had already made them show expressions of disgust. The situation was far beyond her expectations. Even though she was disgusted, even though she could not wait to turn her snake-like long neck and bite the dirty green skin on her back to death, every single dragon obeyed the orc's orders. Not a single dragon struggled to break free from the humiliating, saddle-like binding prop. What happened to the Red Dragon clan that defeated the Burning Legion 10,000 years ago? What was it that made the arrogant dragons submit to the puny orcs? Was it some kind of mysterious power? Her curiosity was about to explode. In another bunker, a beautiful woman with a face similar to the one just now, but more gorgeous and wilder, had the same question. However, she looked at the problem from a different angle. She paid more attention to the enemy itself. This group of red dragons looked terrifying, but fortunately there were no real giant dragons among them. That's right. They had a lifespan of more than 1,000 years. When they truly grew up, their wingspans would easily exceed 10 meters. They would possess powerful magical abilities and a powerful body that surpassed other young dragons. They were the most terrifying existences. Although these red dragons in the sky looked very powerful, compared to a real giant dragon they were far from it. Whether it was magical abilities, physical combat abilities, or intelligence, the beautiful woman, of course, was Aurelia Windrunner. The moment she received the news that the Horde's transport fleet had split up, she was forced to come here by Duque using the magic that she hated the most. Regarding this, Aurelia was a little angry. That terrible trip to space had left her in a daze. Now she knew why. She also understood why Duque repeatedly told her to just kill the enemy's cavalry. Damn it, that rascal Duque definitely knew something. Rascal, can't you just tell me directly? You're always so secretive. Aurelia spat angrily, hating a certain someone. Windrunner had a jumpy personality. As the most mature elder sister, Aurelia still cared about the big picture. She turned her head and looked at Alucia Barov, who had just been urgently transferred here today. Miss Barov, I'm counting on you. Alucia nodded calmly. Aurelia whistled and the sound of the wind poured out. Are you ready? Cervanez's voice came through the wind. Who do you think I am? That voice was like a proud warhorse that was ready to charge. Then, let's go. The flames that the Red Dragon army spewed out were too much and too fierce. The entire area was covered in flames like a sea of fire. More torrents with blazing golden light descended from the sky, making the waves of the sea of fire rise higher and higher. Just then, over 100 elemental fluctuations attracted the attention of the Red Dragon army. Human magicians? In the sky, the chief of the Dragon Maw clan, Zuluhid, who was riding the largest red dragon, narrowed his eyes. He let the red dragon under him hover in the air, trying to find those damn human magicians from the sky. In any case, human magicians were rare, and humans could threaten the dragon army. Not to mention an organized group of magicians. After Orgrim purged the Shadow Council, the Horde was indeed more united, and there was only one voice left. On the other hand, the Horde was lacking in magicians. Almost every chieftain was ordered by Orgrim to prioritize killing the opposing mages. Zuluhid was disappointed. Not a single human could be seen, let alone magicians. The humans who used to be incomparably arrogant had all turned into cowards. Umph. Zulu Hid called out, and one of his subordinates immediately lowered the red dragon mount and dove into the strait, raising a huge special war flag. That was the signal. The orc transport ships that had stopped outside the range of the catapults suddenly moved. The laborers rowed hard to get the transport ships moving again, trying to cross the strait faster. On the other side, at the southern end of Solder Bridge, a group of orcs began to charge. They obviously wanted to use the cover of the Red Dragon army to kill their way over as soon as possible and open up the most convenient and fast way to invade. The horde's attack went smoothly. The sudden appearance of the Red Dragon suppressed all resistance from the humans, until an emerald arrow appeared. Chapter 313. No one knew where the green arrow had come from or where it was going. The arrow was like a wisp of cotton swept up by the wind. It was unbelievably light. It streaked across the sky above the scorched land, passed through the sea of fire, and finally floated dozens of meters in the air. It wasn't that no orc dragon riders noticed this strange green color, it was just that this green color was too harmless to humans and animals. But something strange happened. An orc riding on a red dragon launched a dive that had been done countless times. His target was the human camp to the north of Solder Bridge. Even though the humans had all run away, as long as the ballistae and cannons fixed on the hilltop weren't destroyed, the humans could charge out of their bunkers and inflict heavy casualties on the orc army that was attacking the North Bridge again. At this time, that green color fused with the green color on the Beastman Dragoon's neck. An arrow pierced through. There was no more life. The orc's eyes widened. He didn't understand at all. Why did he die? When did he get attacked? The blood spurting out of his throat drew a long line of blood in the air because of the dragon's high speed. His vision darkened and he fell from the dragon's back. Suddenly losing its controller, the young crimson dragon was at a loss. It quickly stopped its dragon breath. Dragon breath wasn't cabbage. It took a lot of energy for a giant dragon to use dragon breath. The continuous breaths just now had already made it hard for him to breathe. Now that the controller had been killed, he was happy to free himself. With a happy roar, he immediately flapped his wings and flew into the sky. Before receiving that order, he longed to breathe the air of freedom. This thought made him quickly leave the battlefield and fly to who knows where. This orc's unfortunate encounter attracted the attention of the Dragon Maw clan's orc dragon riders. They widened their bell-sized eyes and quickly moved their eyeballs, searching for the attack from the ground. This wasn't a single case. Soon more green arrows flew into the sky. No one knew where they came from. They only knew that orcs were killed with one arrow after another. Where? Where is it? Who saw the enemy? Nope. Nazuzu is dead, Batua is also dead. The draconic roar beastmen were in a state of panic. The destruction they had expected didn't happen. They didn't kill many humans and they only burned a large pile of large military equipment that they thought was worthless. What was going on? The orcs began to fear the green color. They even pulled on the red dragon's reins when they saw it, causing the red dragon to ascend at a high speed. It was useless. Those green arrows were like ghosts and they could actually coordinate with each other. For example, an orc saw an arrow flying towards him from his left. When he tried to dodge the arrow in a panic, an arrow silently came from his blind spot to his right and ended his life. After the 20th Beastman Dragon Rider was killed, no Beastman dared to ride a red dragon within 100 meters of the ground. At this moment, they suddenly realized that the flames on the ground had been extinguished. It wasn't that the flames couldn't burn any longer, but that the flames had been extinguished. An icy aura quickly spread across the land, and the rolling white mist covered every single flame, snuffing them out in the cold. As the cold air covered the land, a large group of slender green figures began to appear in the icy mist on the ground. Rangers of the High Elves. Zulud was extremely shocked. They actually let their precious mages use large-scale war magic to protect these elves? It had to be said that this was a genius idea. No longer restricted by the limited range and narrow field of vision, the range of the elves' arrows was greatly increased. This time, a total of 5 Beastman Dragon Riders were shot dead at a distance of about 150 meters from the ground. This is impossible. Zulud cried out in shock. This had completely surpassed the concept of bows and arrows, and it defied all so-called common sense. Using a delicate longbow to shoot down a giant dragon that was doing all sorts of evasive maneuvers 150 meters in the air was already very impressive, not to mention the orc cavalrymen who were sitting on the giant dragon and couldn't be seen from the ground. What kind of terrifying and mysterious archery was this? It was completely unimaginable what kind of being could shoot such an arrow. Zulud's mind was filled with projectile monsters that were stronger than ogres. If he knew that the real archers were just two seemingly delicate blonde elven girls, he really didn't know how he would feel. In any case, not a single red dragon cavalryman dared to approach the ground. Even the lowest red dragon was 300 meters above the ground. Zulud cursed angrily. He stared at the transport ship that was about to enter the bottom of Solder Bridge and gritted his teeth. Alright, at least I've escorted the transport ship over and completed the chief's mission. It was as if he was making the greatest mockery of Zulud and his Dragon Maw cavalry. At this moment, a pair of fearless humans rushed out of cover and ran towards an intact catapult that was placed on the edge of the cliff. It looked like they were going to use the catapult to finish off the transport ship in the strait. Zulud's lungs were about to explode. Use dragon breath to burn those guys to ashes. But what about the elven rangers? Every surviving Dragon Maw cavalry member felt a lingering fear. That patch of green had become a lingering shadow in their hearts. Come here. Zulud cast a spell at the closest Dragon Maw cavalry member. Immediately, that guy felt as if a small tornado was revolving around him. He was overjoyed. Wind Shield was a defensive spell of the shaman. It was a wind shield made from the power of nature and could defend against all kinds of arrows. The next moment that guy rushed over. Not only him, there were also several other Dragon Maw cavalry members who were also buffed by Wind Shield. They drove their red dragons towards the humans and bombarded them. For the red dragons, a distance of 300 meters could be covered in 2 breaths. The green arrows were like the Grim Reaper, arriving at just the right time. As always, they were aimed at the orc cavalryman's vitals, but they were stopped just before they were about to kill the orc cavalryman. It seemed like they could break through the weak wind at any time, but the green arrows just couldn't get in no matter how hard they tried. This time, the green Grim Reaper let out a helpless sigh. No! Sylvanas cried out in alarm. Just a moment ago, she had proudly used the Whisper of the Wind to guarantee the safety of the torrential stronghold's ballistae. With my godly arrows, none of the Dragon Maw cavalry can hurt you. That was what she had said. But now, the opponent's shaman magic had mercilessly shattered her pride. Sylvanas was on the verge of tears. At this moment, a flash of white light appeared. Chapter 3:14. Wind Arrow, the unique skill of the Windrunner family. The heaven-defying Windrunner could make these arrows, which were as light as cotton wool, float along with the wind. Yes, not shoot, not pierce, but float. By locking on to the opponent's vital points in the wind, the arrow would float along the preset wind trajectory to its destination. The human body moved in the air, and every movement of the limbs had to expel the air near its destination. The movement of air was the wind. If one did not understand the law of the wind or use something to break the law of the wind, then no matter how one dodged or how strong the wind was, the wind arrow would still hit its intended target. However, no matter what level of godly skill it was, it still crossed the boundary of skill and was included in the category of nature magic. Sylvanas and Aurelia's wind arrow had always been successful. Even when facing orc warlocks, there was never a situation where they could not hit their target. Of course, it was a different matter if the opponent used a shield to block the attack. The wind arrow was indeed the nemesis of the Dragon Maw clan's dragon cavalry, who had almost no armor in order to reduce their weight. What the two Windrunner sisters did not expect was that in the Horde's camp, there was only one powerful shaman in the sky. Every qualified shaman was a master of nature magic. The Windrunner sisters' long-range magic arrows were completely countered by Zulud. It was not that the Windrunner sisters could not defeat Zulud. In the first place, this so-called duel had a very unfair premise: the giant dragon. Although he couldn't tell which dragon Zulud was riding, he could tell from the size of the red dragon that it was definitely more than 1,000 years old. It could take on a human form and cast a lot of magic. It was a true dragon in the truest sense of the word. The army was already at a disadvantage against the air force. They were completely defeated in terms of mobility, not to mention that Zulud was riding an adult red dragon that was the ruler of the sky. Zulud could easily defend and not attack, allowing the giant dragon to take care of anyone. With these two factors combined, the Windrunner sisters were at a great disadvantage, especially those brave torrential fort ballista gunners. Sylvanas would not be able to forgive himself for a long time if those brave torrential fort ballista gunners were really burned to death. No, it was the same mournful cry that lingered for a long time. A ranger could be a sharp attacker, but unfortunately, a ranger could never be a protector like a paladin. Servanas could only watch helplessly as the red dragon's flames descended upon those brave warriors who had summoned their courage to come out, only to face the flames of death helplessly and hopelessly. Servanas didn't have any special feelings towards ordinary humans. However, for these people who bore her promise, if they died, it would undoubtedly be a mockery and destruction to the pride in Servanas' heart. Even Aurelia, who was not far away, bit her red lips. Perhaps this will destroy the trust humans have in us? In that instant, the Windrunner sisters felt their hearts wrench in pain. A streak of familiar white light saved those crossbow gunners, as well as the Windstalker's promise. Hand of Magic, it was this thing again. When a Hand of Magic played instant division from 1 to 2, then 2 to 4, until there were 128, it might seem like just a magic trick. When 128 hands of magic cast Icicle at the same time, using 128 small ice whirlwinds to form a huge wall of ice, blocking the dragon breath of the 5 young red dragons, when the elements of ice and fire collided fiercely in midair, condensing into a gorgeous boundary line of ice and fire, Aurelia and Servanas shouted the same name in infinite surprise at the same time. Duque. Duque, different ending notes, different lingering charm, and the same surprise. After shouting at the same time, the two sisters looked at each other from 50 meters away, which was rare. They both saw the embarrassment in each other's eyes, and then looked away at the same time. Well, no matter what, their promise was kept. A flash. In a sudden dazzling white light, Duque's figure suddenly appeared next to the panicked cannoneers. Duque smiled at them. Attack. Duke Marcus, the deputy commander of the Alliance, is with you. At this time, the panicked cannoneers all revealed ecstatic smiles. Thank you very much, honorable deputy commander. Oh my god. This is so happy. The high-ranking mage, the Duke of Stormwind, the extraordinary deputy commander of the Alliance of Lordaeron, Duque, is personally protecting us? Even though they saw it with their own eyes, the cannoneers still could not believe their eyes. If he could survive today, he would definitely brag to his descendants for the rest of their lives. Back then, I, your grandfather, was protected by the magic of the Alliance's vice-commander. I survived the flames of the 5 red dragons, and I even braved the dragon's breath that could burn the earth to ashes to open fire at those damn orc transport ships. With joy and excitement, the cannoneers skillfully operated the cannons and roared at the transport ships in the center of the strait. Duque's appearance scared Zulud and his men. The red dragons climbed up one after another. Duque was a magic-type powerhouse who had just killed the Shadow Council's powerhouse, Lakama Sharktooth, so they could not be too careful. Chief, what do we do? The dragon roar beastmen asked Zulud. Don't go down. We can suppress them from the sky. As long as the transport ships pass, it will be our victory. Zulud was very clear-headed. A true archmage was indeed terrifying. However, no matter what kind of magic it was, it had a range. As long as there was enough distance, the magic that needed to fly to hit the target would not be able to do anything to the red dragons in the sky. What do we do? The Windrunner sisters, who had rushed to Duque's side, asked the same question. They could tell at a glance that Duque might be able to use magic to protect one or no more than 10 groups of cannoneers, but it was definitely not enough to face the Horde's army on the other side of the bridge and the Red Dragon cavalry in the sky. They had to get the troops from Torrent Fortress out of their bunkers as soon as possible and rebuild the line of defense on the north side of Sardal Bridge. The most important thing now was to get rid of those annoying Orc Dragon cavalry. The problem was that there were still over 100 controlled red dragons in the sky. As much as they did not want to admit it, Duque had undoubtedly become the Windrunner sisters' last hope. If they wanted to prove themselves and the strength of the High Elf Rangers, if they wanted to show off in front of everyone, it seemed that in the end they still had to rely on Duque. Seeing that Duque did not answer immediately, the great demon Queen Aurelia began to tempt him. Come, little brother Duque, help me think of a good way to get rid of those evil big lizards. I will repay you later. At this moment, Duque smiled. Can you guys fly? The Windrunner sisters were stunned. No way, then let big brother Duque take you guys to show off and fly. Chapter 315. Fly. What a lofty name. Since the birth of humans, countless people had tried to break free from the shackles of gravity and fly into the sky. The world of Azeroth did not have the right brothers, but there were dwarves who sought death by building airplanes. I've gone too far. Windrunner, in the world of Rangers and even in the world of the High Elves, it represented the two extremes of wind and speed. However, there was a sad story called, Windrunner can't really ride the wind and fly into the sky. No matter how many years passed or even until the moment of their death, the Windrunner sisters would never forget the same question they asked their parents when they were young. Why can't Windrunner fly? Aurelia was the same. Sylvanas was the same. Sasha and Lilith were the same. Even though they were old, even though they knew that elves were not dragons and could not fly by nature. However, in the deepest part of their hearts, they still had the same dream, the same desire. Fly. Now, Duque actually said, bring them to show off, bring them to fly? The Windrunner sisters did not know what show off was. But flying. As far as they knew, there was no spell in Azeroth that could allow people to truly fly. What are you going to do? Sylvanas' eyebrows moved, with some excitement and agitation. If I disappoint you, there will be serious consequences. Aurelia seemed to be very dignified and elegant, her left hand supporting her right elbow and her right hand supporting her chin. However, under that mature and steady appearance, a wild and passionate heart was beating. This was not the first day she knew Duque. Every time she met him, she would be intrigued by Duque's miracles. A human who always had countless new and interesting gadgets easily won the liking of the active Windrunner. Duque was like a wonderful book. The book was not thick and it felt like it could be finished in one go. Who knew that as she read on, there would be new surprises every time. Her eyes moved and the focus of her attention was only on Duque. Duque smiled mysteriously. I plan to do this. All of a sudden, 128 hands of magic raised their palms to the sky and shot frost arrows from all directions. No, it wasn't as simple as frost arrows. This was an icicle arrow hail that reduced damage in exchange for a higher shooting speed. The casting time of level 1 frost arrow was the shortest. With the support of various metamagic abilities, the casting time of each frost arrow was reduced to less than half a second. In a situation where there was no additional injection of ice elemental energy, it was just pieces of ice crystals that were shot into the sky. From afar, it looked like a fountain of ice and snow that kept spewing upward. Duque bowed elegantly. Beautiful Windrunner ladies, the splendid stage is ready. Aren't you going to go up and perform a wind dance? The emerald eyes of Aurelia and Sylvanas flickered with pleasant surprise. They completely understood that Duque wanted them to use the ice crystals as a springboard to jump into the air and attack. For mortals, this was definitely an incredible thing. Stepping on a flying ice prism to jump higher into the sky, then stepping on another even higher ice prism to jump up again, using the ice prism as leverage to jump more than 200 meters in the air, and then launching an attack on the orc cavalry on the back of the red dragon flying in the air. From the sound of it, this was simply wishful thinking and crazy courting death. For mortals, perhaps it was true. For the Windrunner, it was a different matter. In a sense, this was no different from what they did when they lightly shuttled through the tall forest, jumping from branch to branch. The only difference was the height, and whether Duke could provide them with enough ice prism pillars at the right places to use as leverage points. If a stranger had asked them to do this, the Windrunner sisters would have snorted. But he was Duke Marcus, a superwise man, a miraculous man who used a magical ice ship to save 50,000 Storm elite soldiers. He didn't ask things like, "Can I trust you?" which spoiled the mood. Instead, it was the most mature and steady elder sister who issued a challenge to her younger sister. "Oh, my dear sister, do you want to compete?" The valiant Aurelia had a charming smile on her face as she raised the longbow in her hand, looking like a hunter who was about to hunt a turkey. "Oh, my beloved sister, how do you want to compete?" Queen Sylvanas, whose competitive spirit was completely aroused, curled her lips and returned a challenging smile. "Quantity. Of course, whoever gets the first prize will be number one." Aurelia glanced at Zuluhid, who was at the highest point in the air. "What about the stakes?" Queen Sylvanas smirked. "How about the loser calls Duque Big Brother 10 times? Among the 4 Windrunner sisters, even the youngest Lilith was over 1,000 years old. Although the Windrunner family was not so particular about etiquette and seniority, it was still embarrassing for them to call a young man less than 20 years old Big Brother. Before Aurelia could agree, Duque answered first. "Okay." Aurelia rolled her eyes at Duque, who was trying to take advantage of her, and finally nodded almost imperceptibly. The 2 sisters didn't say what the prize for the winner was. It was simple. For the Windrunner who loved the wind and freedom, flying was the best prize. In the next second, the 2 beautiful figures disappeared. Amidst the whooshing sound of the ice crystals shooting up into the sky, there was a faint sound of collision. Every ice crystal that deviated from its predetermined trajectory was accompanied by a vigorous green figure whose figure was almost invisible to the naked eye. Ha 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 ha. Ah. Clear laughter, hearty laughter, enough to make people dream. The laughter of the Windrunner sisters grew louder and louder with the ice crystal fountain until it rose nearly 300 meters into the sky. The seemingly random ice crystals could not hit the flying red dragon, but they had enough footholds for the Windrunner sisters to close the distance between them and the dragon riders. This allowed them to display their magnificent and explosive archery skills. Dance of Three Arrows? It was a knight-errant archery skill that shot 3 rounds of arrows in a short period of time. In the hands of the Windrunner sisters, this skill became a godly skill that could shoot 3 arrows at a time and shoot 9 arrows in 3 rounds. Stepping on the ice prism that was less than the size of an adult's palm, Aurelia bent her beautiful waist backward in order to find an angle to shoot. Under the force of her waist and abdomen, the seductive mermaid line was clearly visible. It was obviously an extremely high speed, and it was obvious that she dodged the red dragon's breath by a hair's breadth. But the moment before shooting, Aurelia fell into a state of extreme stillness. Chapter 3:16. The red dragon's crisscrossing sharp teeth, the orcs' open mouths when they roared, and the dragon riders' bloodshot eyes were reflected in Aurelia's emerald eyes. Whoosh! The sound of sharp arrows gliding. Faced with the Windrunner's archery, even the great shaman's nature's protection could only sigh helplessly and hopelessly. 2 arrows broke the wind shield. 1 arrow hit the face. The result of 3 rounds of 9 arrows was that 3 dragon riders lost their lives forever. Their sinful bodies fell from the sky and died without a complete corpse. No. Zulu Cid was so angry that his eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets. Kill them. Go tear them apart. The Dragonmaw orcs' throats were almost hoarse from shouting. Driven by them, the red dragons showed their fierceness as the overlords of the sky. They pounced quickly and violently with a large area of scorching dragon breath. Everything was chasing the 2 ghostly green figures. But no matter what, they couldn't catch up. This situation was completely unacceptable to the Dragonmaw orcs. The elven rangers who couldn't fly used the ice prisms to make all kinds of godly dodges in the air. Even the most imaginative orcs couldn't imagine such a situation. But the other party not only thought of it but also did it. Duque's cooperation with the Windrunner sisters could be said to be flawless. Whether they wanted to speed up or turn in the air, when they needed it most, in the most ideal place, there would be an ice prism flying out of nowhere just right. The hands of magic floating 100 meters in the air would certainly not disappoint and shoot the ice prism more than 100 meters into the sky to the most perfect place. There was no need for words, no need for hints. Duque did all this perfectly with the help of the system. Aurelia and Queen Sylvanas were pleasantly surprised, no, ecstatic. They didn't know that Duque's system determined all their movement trajectories, the enemy's attack routes and possible dodging routes. All Duque had to do was to let the hands of magic shoot the ice prism in the desired route. They were just very excited. So there is someone in the world who can get along with me so well? Could this be the legendary telepathy, our hearts are connected as one's heart? In any case, at first glance, the Windrunner sisters seemed to be flying. With agility that surpassed griffins and even giant dragons, it flapped its wings, twisted its body, and soared in the air at an altitude of 300 meters. Zuluhid was about to go crazy. The draconic beastman was terrified. Some of the dragon riders began to urge their giant dragons to climb higher into the sky in order to gain a moment of peace. There were also some dragon riders who crazily dived towards Duque, who was controlling the ice fountain, only to be killed by the arrows of the elven rangers who had been waiting for a long time. Whether Zulud was willing to admit it or not, the Red Dragon army, which had been chased out of the battlefield, had not played its role at all. At this moment, the Orc army had almost reached the northern sniping point of Solder Bridge, and the transport ships had almost reached the bottom of the bridge. At this moment, by Duque's side were nearly 10,000 torrential fortress soldiers who had long since returned to their posts. They cheered and shouted, "Long live Duque," or "Long live the Alliance." With more complete heavy ordnance, they rained down a deathly rain of stones, ballistae and cannonballs on the tribe. As always, a rain of flesh and blood rained down on the bridge. Orc corpses and broken limbs that had been sent flying by the huge stones fell from the side of the bridge like dumplings. As some of the ordnance had been destroyed by the dragon's breath, it was impossible to completely seal off the strait. But for every transport ship to pass through, at least 2 ships had to be sunk. Looking at the miserable state of the army, at the draconic beastman cavalry beside him, and then at the Windrunner sisters who had dominated the mid-low altitudes and were unstoppable, Zuluhid's eyes were bloodshot. Retreat. The chief of the Dragonmaw clan had used up almost all his courage to shout this word. It was easy to make the orcs attack. but it required supreme courage to make the orcs retreat. This was because he would have to bear the scorn of other clans and the disdain of almost the entire tribe. Zuluhid had no other choice. A red dragon that could be used as a mount was too precious, especially when he realized that the red dragons that had escaped from the battlefield were all flying towards the north. He had a deep sense of foreboding. As long as that thing was here, there should be no need to worry that the red dragons that had escaped would not return. But he had a premonition that these abominable lizards would never return. This anxiety almost drove Zuluhid crazy. The red dragon army, which should have been killing everything in its path, had retreated like stray dogs with their tails between their legs. The entire sky echoed with the laughter of the Windrunner sisters. This was flying that they had not dared to imagine for thousands of years. Fighting against the noble overlords of the sky, the dragons, and killing the filthy and ugly orcs in the high altitudes that they had never touched before, was there anything more wonderful than this for the Windrunner sisters? Even the mature and steady Aurelia could not help but laugh from the bottom of her heart. Their emerald green knee-high boots tapped lightly on the ice prism that was constantly descending. The Windrunner sisters were like fairies descending from the sky, jumping down step by step. "Yo, beautiful elven girls, are you looking for a husband? Goddess, I love you." The generals and soldiers from Torrential Fortress gave the warmest cheers to the two female elven rangers who were flying in the sky. Aurelia combed her long blonde hair that had been messed up by the wind so that she could return to the image of a dignified ranger in the shortest time possible. Queen Sylvanas, on the other hand, proudly stood with her hands on her hips, forming a graceful S-shaped curve as she accepted the cheers of thousands of soldiers. Although the Windrunner sisters had killed the most enemies, the focus of the sisters' attention was on Duque. They knew very well that without Duque, they would not have been able to create such a miracle. Before thanking Duque, it was better to settle some things first. "My beloved sister, how are the results?" 68. Aurelia held her head high and chest out, inadvertently making the pair of Hygel peaks even more alluring. Sylvanas was taken aback. "What's wrong? My good sister, did you lose?" Aurelia had the happy smile of a big sister who had successfully consolidated her position. Queen Sylvanas shrugged and spread out her hands. "I did not lose. You won? How much?" Aurelia's senses were very sharp. She was very sure that her sister's kill count should not be higher than hers. Queen Sylvanas sighed. "I did not win either. I also got 68. A trace of disappointment and joy flashed in Aurelia's eyes. She was disappointed because she could not establish a strong position as the big sister. She was happy because her sister's skills were not inferior to hers. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.